home, and the neat rows of vegetables in the little garden his mother planted in the backyard, counting everything, endless numbers streaming through his mind. Numbers that meant something, numbers that meant order, numbers that defined his world. The numbers filled his mind, consumed him. They were his friends, his toys. He put them together and took them apart, examining them in his own mind until he understood exactly how they worked, multiplying them, dividing them, squaring them, and factoring them. Even as he'd grown up and begun to talk of other things, the numbers were always there, streaming through his mind. Now, in the terrifying darkness into which he'd awakened, he began to play with the numbers once more. Timmy began with 1,000,000. He'd always liked that number, a 1 with 6 zeros after it. He multiplied it by 999,999. Then he multiplied the total by 999,998. He kept going, the numbers in his head growing ever larger, occupying more and more of his mind. And yet the shadows were still there. And though he tried to concentrate only on the numbers, never losing track of the total, the shadows and the silence still close around him. He moved the numbers into the space in the back of his mind where he could keep them going with half his mind, and used the rest of his mind to try once more to figure out where he was, and how he'd gotten into the shadows. School. He'd been at school before he woke in the shadows. A nice school. A school he liked, where the other kids were almost as good at numbers as he was. A pretty school with a big house set on a broad lawn, shaded by the biggest trees Timmy had ever seen. Redwood trees. He'd never seen trees that big before his parents had brought him to the school, nor had he ever had friends before. Friends like himself, who could do things with their brains that other children couldn't. But now something had happened to him. What? He tried to remember. He'd been in his room on the 3rd floor. He'd been asleep. And before that, he'd been crying because he'd felt homesick, missing his mother and father, and even his little brother whom he didn't even really like. He'd cried himself to sleep, wondering if everyone was going to tease him the next morning because he'd burst into tears in the dining room and run out and up the stairs, slamming his door and not letting anyone in all evening. Then, sometime in the night, he'd awakened and heard something. Heard what? Timmy couldn't remember. He concentrated harder, and a memory, so fleeting it was barely there at all, stirred. A rattling sound, like the old elevator that went from the 1st floor all the way up to the 4th floor. Then, nothing, until he'd awakened in the shadows, awakened to find that there was still nothing. Once more he tried to reach out, but his body refused to respond, refused even to acknowledge the commands his mind issued. Paralyzed. His entire body was paralyzed. Now the panic that had been entangling him in its grasp gripped him with an irresistible force, and he screamed out silently. He tried to scream again, when out of the shadows, lights began to shine, brilliant lights in a spectrum of colors he'd never beheld before in his life. Sounds, too, burst forth out of the silence that had surrounded him from the moment of his awakening, a cacophony of achromatic chords layered over with the screeches and cries of the damned souls of hell. The sound built along with the blazing lights until Timmy Evans was certain that if it didn't stop, his eyes would burn away and his eardrums would burst. Crying out once more, he tried to turn his mind away from the sights and sounds that assaulted him, to turn inward and bury himself among the numbers that still streamed through the far reaches of his consciousness. But it was too late. He couldn't find the numbers, couldn't make sense of the gibberish he found where only a few short seconds ago the order of mathematics had been. Then, as the sensory attack built to a crescendo, Timmy Evans knew what was happening to him. Just as he realized what was happening, the last moment came. The lights struck once more, with an intensity that tore through his brain, and the howling cacophony shattered his weakening mind. In a blaze of light, accompanied by the roaring symphony of 1,000 freight trains, Timmy Evans died. Died without ever remembering exactly what had happened to him. Died without understanding how or why. Died